politics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. After my interview with Mila Atmos, Trey will join me for a conservative perspective. My guest today is Mila Atmos, host of the most excellent Future Hindsight podcast. It's a great show, and I think she's doing some really important work there. And so I am very pleased to be talking with her today. Mila, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thank you for those kind words.
Oh, absolutely. So I thought the best place to start would be, instead of me giving a long introduction about what the Future Hindsight is about, that you could maybe start by telling listeners a little bit about your background and Future Hindsight, and, why you started it, what it's about, that sort of thing.
Sure. So, one of the reasons I started is that because during the 2016 election cycle, I felt like we were missing a lot of context in the media, that what we really heard about was outrage both on the left and the right, but we didn't actually talk about the issues, and we didn't really talk about why we should elect one candidate over another and what their policy proposals were for our country. And I thought, we really need to have more of that kind of conversation. And not only did I feel that we needed to have more context about the issues, I also felt like even if we are having conversations about issues, they're incredibly shallow and one-dimensional. And so I wanted to really talk about what are the issues really about? And if we talk about the issue for half an hour as opposed to, just read the headline of an article, what are we going to discover about what's possible in terms of the public interest?
So yes. That's what I really admire about your show is the depth, not only the depth, but pretty much all of the episodes are things that retain their value over time. And in an era where so much of our political discourse is so, ephemeral, I guess, what you're doing, that's why I think it's so important, because I believe it has enduring value.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope that I'm really providing that, because it's so complicated. It doesn't appear to exist any other place. And I often, when I see articles about issues or see news reports, I always have questions. Like, but what about this question? How come this question wasn't asked? Or what about this issue? How come we didn't talk about that? And so I wanted to have my own show where I would ask those questions. Or at least I thought, if nobody else is going to ask those questions, maybe I should.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of issues that people are talking about these days, and also have deeper importance, I think one of the main ones, or the main one, is obviously impeachment. And Politics Guys listeners know how I feel about this issue, because we've been talking about it so often. But briefly, I believe that President Trump has really committed multiple impeachable offenses, but unfortunately that House Democrats just haven't yet built a strong enough case and have decided for political reasons to not do that. But also that far too many people on both sides of the aisle have basically made up their minds before hearing any evidence. That's kind of my brief take. Emil, what's your view, kind of broader view on the impeachment process, at least to this point?
So I agree with you that he has committed multiple impeachable offenses. And I actually think that the process has been surprisingly good. I really thought that the hearings that Adam Schiff led were quite eye-opening. And so my background is in foreign policy. I studied international security in graduate school, and so I pay a lot of attention to matters of foreign policy. And so I was really struck by the testimony of people like Dr. Hill, Ambassador Yovanovitch, Ambassador Taylor, just how clear they were, and also how patriotic they were in terms of stepping out and really laying out the facts.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And, it reminds me, there used to be an old saying that politics stops at the water's edge. Now, that was never obviously entirely true, certainly. But one thing that's really disturbed me about this entire process is how this seems to be in some way almost playing into the hands of one of our main strategic adversaries. And that, of course, is Russia. And seeing the Republican Party, which one would think historically was very anti-Russia or anti-Soviet, basically making arguments that seem to actually bolster Russia and Putin. I mean, is that your sense of it as well?
Yes, 100%. I think we are totally playing into their hands. My guess is that Putin is having a glass of champagne every day, celebrating how this is this is working out way better than he thought it would. So, in fact, I think he's probably surprised that Trump won the election.
Yeah.
I think his goal was to destabilize the American democracy, and he succeeded.
I guess I can understand Donald Trump putting his own personal fortunes, I guess you can say, above that of national security. But what's more disheartening to me is how many Republicans in Congress seem willing to almost happily go along. Was that surprising or shocking to you?
No, not at this point. I mean, 3.5 years into this presidency,
Yeah.
no, not anymore, right? But uh, I will say that I am shocked by how far some people have gone, and that they will just take on complete talking points from Russia, which Dr. Hill warned us against, right? And I just thought, why is nobody paying attention to to that? Why do they just keep on going? I also felt that the way that they conducted themselves in the hearings, which were just being obstructionist and shouting and not really making any points, I thought was really damaging to the Republican Party in terms of what it looked like on television.
Yeah. So, I feel that it's hard for me to understand anyone who would look at any of the evidence and say that there's not at least enough there to impeach the president, which again is just, it doesn't remove him from office, just gets to that point where there's a trial in the Senate. But I've also said that if I were a senator at this point, I wouldn't vote to convict the president, remove him from office. And that's because I have a very high, what you might call evidentiary standard, in that I think there needs to be an incredible amount I need to be absolutely certain before I would vote to remove a president from office before his term is ended. And so I was wondering what your take was on this. If you were in that position with the evidence we have now, how would you vote, and why would you go in that direction?
Well, I would definitely vote to convict and remove him. And I think the evidence that we heard so far is pretty clear cut. I don't think that there's anything else more to see. Of course, it would be really helpful for us to hear directly from John Bolton as opposed to in a book that he wants us to buy. I think that's totally wrong. I mean, what's that all about?
Yeah.
Or Mick Mulvaney. I think there are some deep problems here. The fact that these people are not giving testimony, I think, is really troubling, and I think doesn't bode well for the president. If he really wants to exonerate himself, he should make those people testify and prove his innocence. But the fact that he's not doing that really makes me deeply suspicious that really there is nothing else here. Everything that we know is already out. It's true. It's indisputable that he has abused his public office, not only for his private gain, but for his personal political gain, which I think is even more troubling than just pocketing some money. I think it's so egregious. It's impeachable, and I think he needs to be removed.
Now, of course, the president's response to the issue of testifying, or at least having people like Bolton and Mulvaney or even Giuliani testify, is that, well, this is something I am doing not just for myself, but for future presidents. I am protecting this idea of executive privilege. What do you think about that argument?
Well, I think that Congress needs to assert itself here and really be a co-equal branch of the government and demand accountability on behalf of the people. And if it doesn't do that, I think it's a problem for the American people, because if we don't do it now, then what is going to be the threshold?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I have been very reluctant to support the idea of impeachment, but I feel that if it is going to be done, it should be done in a very complete and full way. And that, I guess, that's part of my frustration, is that it almost seems to me that my party, the Democrats, they've sort of decided to not push the court cases to force these folks to testify, but to kind of go ahead with impeachment before we get resolutions on this. But I guess you feel that that's not problematic because there's enough evidence as is. Is that right?
I think it's problematic that we're not pursuing it more vigorously, although it's not that they aren't. It's just very slow.
Right. Yeah.
And I know that they're also pursuing in the courts other evidence about the accounting irregularities with Mazars and also the papers from Deutsche Bank. So I think those things might still come out before the end of the year. Before they write up the articles of impeachment, those might still come out. But I also think that they have taken maybe a page from Mueller to say, look, at the end of the day, we have plenty of evidence. And if we can't get everybody, every single person, let the record show we tried and they refused, they obstructed. So I think there's something to be said about that as well, even though it's not perfect.
Yeah, I certainly think, at least in terms of bringing in some of the material that Robert Mueller put together, because it seems to me pretty clear that he felt that the president did some things that, while he was not prepared to say he would indict him, or he didn't feel he had the power to, that they certainly they bore further investigation by Congress. I think all but said that in his report.
That's right. So I am sure that in the articles of impeachment, they will include some of the findings from the Mueller report. And in fact, I think that some of the stuff that they've done since the Mueller reporting, for example, following the money, I think are totally in keeping with the recommendation of the Mueller report, and will definitely dovetail into the impeachment articles. And I don't know how much of it will be there, because I think there is a fine line to be drawn between including too many things and not enough things. And so I'm sure they're having many conversations about that in Congress.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. What do you think about, and you've heard this argument, it actually, I think it's going to be more common as time goes by, that, well, we're going to have a presidential election anyway. And isn't it better to just let the people decide, as opposed to having, just a very small, unrepresentative sample in Congress make this decision? What do you think about that argument?
Well, I have two responses. One is that if you support impeachment, or if you don't support impeachment, you should let your member of Congress know. You should pick up the phone, make a phone call, and say you are a constituent in his or her district and you support or you don't support. And I think your congressperson, your member of Congress, needs to know that. So I think it is not that they're making this decision without input from the people if we don't actually do it. So I think that's upon us to do. And the second thing is that I also happen to come from a deeply corrupt country. I'm originally Indonesian. I'm a naturalized citizen. And Indonesia is the kind of place where there is no accountability for leaders. When I was growing up there as a child, we had a dictator. He was commonly referred to internationally as a benign dictator, which doesn't mean that there weren't extrajudicial killings or that there wasn't a war happening in East Timor that we never heard about if we lived in Indonesia,
Uh-huh.
So I kind of feel like, well, this is not the kind of thing that's supposed to happen here in this country, in the United States, a nation of laws. And I think that if we don't hold the president accountable here, of all places, this is a terrible precedent for democracy all over the world.
Yeah. I certainly agree with that. But there's also another viewpoint. Speaker Pelosi actually at one point earlier this year in March said, that she felt that if we shouldn't be pursuing impeachment because it was so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path. Now, it seems like I would argue that it sure seems compelling and overwhelming, but one thing it doesn't seem is bipartisan, and that's a difference certainly that's worth talking about. Well, what do you think about that? Do you feel that the potential divisiveness of going through this without any kind of bipartisan support outweighs the importance of doing this as a matter of, I guess you could say, justice?
You know, that's an interesting question. I think that it matters to the American people, maybe not right now, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when we look back at this time, whether Congress did the right thing, whether it was expedient or not, or whether it was bipartisan or not. Because, like I said, if this is a nation of laws, this is still the right thing to do. And if one party doesn't believe that, which I really find difficult to believe, I really feel that a lot of Republican Congress members have been compromised in this, that they are not really speaking for how they really feel inside. And I'm just guessing. I just can't believe it. I think reasonable people uh, all over the spectrum can see that there are some things that are deeply wrong with what happened. I think it will, I think we will be judged as a people if we don't do it. And I think that's something that looms very large for people who are serving, I think for people who are paying attention to this. And I know a lot of people really aren't, even though we talk about it all the time. People like you and me, because we pay a lot of attention. But, I talk to people at my gym or even at school. And some people are like, you know what, I can't be bothered to pay attention. My life is full. I'm busy and all that. And so it's very shocking, but I think that's how it is.
Yeah. On your show, you focus a lot on civic engagement and how citizens can be change makers. And I want to try to apply that to this particular issue. I mean, there are a lot of people, I think, who feel, even engaged people who feel that, well, this seems to be a done deal, that the impeachment vote is, we pretty much know what it's going to be. This president's going to stay in office. And so what's the point in following it and being engaged? Now, I know you have a different view on that. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that and how you feel people can make a difference and why they should try to do that when it comes to this.
Right. So I believe that this is not a done deal. And I believe that because humans are complex, right? And so there are numerous upsets when you watch sporting events. And even when we look back at our very own election in 2016, we all thought that Hillary had it in the bag. And so many numbers of us decided not to vote because we were confident that she was going to win it. And then she didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all this to say, we really don't know what the future holds. We really have no idea, And so if we really want to make a difference, I think we should get active. We should demand that our members of Congress listen to us, whether it's your representative in the House. Like I said earlier, you can tell them if you want them to support or not support articles of impeachment. If you have a senator that you feel must hear from you. I mean, I think, in my case, for example, Gerald Nadler actually represents my district, so I don't think I need to necessarily contact him. But at the same time, I'm sure that he appreciates it when he hears that there are constituents who support the work that he does. So I think that goes for everybody. And one of my favorite podcast episodes was with Brad Fitch of the Congressional Management Foundation. And he basically said that, members of Congress listen to their constituents. They want to hear from their constituents, and not only on hot button issues, but of course, in this case, necessarily on hot button issues. But when you engage with your member of Congress, they are obliged to actually take a tally and understand how many people want something, and to illustrate by example. For example, it is during the Obama administration when he wanted to send a warning to Syria, the red line that Syria crossed after they bombed their own citizens with chemical weapons. He went to Congress, and Congress heard overwhelmingly from their constituents that they didn't want to go and engage in Syria. And so they didn't. So I think it works. We just have to do it, and we can't be cynical about it. I mean, we are cynical about it, but all I'm saying is that if we're only cynical about it, then then there is really no hope.
Right.
And so I think all of us should participate and make our voices heard. And when we don't do that, then we have only ourselves to blame in a way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about a little bit about the other big issue that everyone is focusing on, other than impeachment, and that's of course the 2020 presidential race, where there's this huge Democratic field, although two high-profile candidates have already dropped out, and it's most recently Kamala Harris, and before that, Beto O'Rourke, who I should point out you interviewed on your podcast, and people should definitely check that out. But at this point, it seems like there are four candidates who have really separated themselves from the rest of the pack of, I think, 15 or so. I don't know at this point, but Biden, Warren, Sanders, and Buttigieg. And for a lot of Democrats, I think, the main focus is choosing somebody who has the best chance of beating Donald Trump in November. But then you have other folks, maybe more progressives, who say, you know what, this is going to be a very hollow victory if the person that we elect, assuming that person wins, isn't committed to really transformative change. And I was wondering, do you have a camp here, or what do you think about this?
That's a great question. I don't think it's a hollow victory to unseat Donald Trump. So I think we can start there.
Yeah.
But having said that, do we need transformative change? Yes. And, watching the DNC do this nomination process, I have come away feeling that what the DNC wants most than anything is to nominate Biden. And I feel like they're quarterbacking this guy all the way to the nomination, come hell or high water. I mean, I might be wrong, right, in terms of what the outcome is.
Yeah.
But I know that this is their preferred candidate. That much is clear. And so in terms of electability, I think we'll just have to see when people actually start voting. In Iowa, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, in Nevada, Super Tuesday. Until people start voting, we don't know who's electable. But if you look by records, for example, how many people have voted for whom, Kamala Harris had 7.5 million votes in California. And if you compare that to somebody like Pete Buttigieg, who won his seat as the mayor of South Bend by 8,500 votes,
yeah,
then, you can have a different kind of conversation. But this is a different race, and people have been running since earlier this year. And I think what we need to do now is just give them a chance and see who votes for who gets the most votes. Because it could be that Joe Biden runs away with it, but it could be that he doesn't.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting comment you made about Biden seemingly, and I would agree with it, being the DNC's choice. And of course, we had a DNC choice back in 2016, and people might want to make that comparison and see how that worked out when the party elites made the decision over, or at least certainly put a foot on the scales or a finger on the scales for one candidate. But that electability issue, I think that word comes up an awful lot, and it's such a subjective thing. And I guess a concern that I have, and that some people have, I think rightly so, is that it can perhaps be a way to make life harder, unfairly so, or to discount women and minorities. And certainly we saw this when Harris dropped out, and now you take a look at the top people, and they're all very white, obviously. And we have this specter of if Joe Biden is the nominee, these two septuagenarian old white guys running, or if it's Michael Bloomberg, I mean, we have two New York septuagenarian billionaires fighting it out, and that seems troublesome to me. Do you have any concerns along these lines?
Yes, I'm deeply concerned about this. how can I say this the right way? I think, I feel that good candidates who have a proven track record for working for the public interest of the American people, like Kamala Harris, or even somebody like Mike Bennett or Steve Bullock. How is it that well, Mike Bennett's still officially in the race, but
Right.
how is it that Bullock is out and Kamala's out and Mike Bloomberg is in? I mean, of course, he's somebody who was a public servant, but there are problems with his record with
Sure.
stop and frisk and having a special deal where he could run a third term, but nobody else. In New York, people remember that, and so we're like, oh yeah, that's great, but maybe not.
Hmm.
I mean, that's one. And then when you talk about Bloomberg, the fact that he's going to be self-funding, right? So he's not actually going to meet the Democratic National Committee standards to make the debate stage because he's not going to take donations from 200,000 people. And so if he's not going to do that, right, then why is he running as a Democrat?
Yeah.
Then what's happening to this process? It's being completely upended. And in the meantime, these poor candidates who have been essentially running around like crazy people since March or February, talking to people and convincing them to give and answering the phone for pollsters, only to have somebody like Mike Bloomberg enter in the end. I mean, I think all about it is wrong.
Yeah. And I would hope that the American people could, at least enough of them could see through that attempt to, I would argue, to sort of buy the election, and enough of them would reject that in the end, certainly. And I have issues with Mike Bloomberg for other reasons as well, but that certainly is on the list there, I think.
Right. I mean, in terms of process, at least, I think we need to be very suspicious there, and whatever his policy issues may be. And so, in terms of electability, I think if people like somebody like him, then meaning somebody who enters late, self-funds, and doesn't abide by the rules that all these other candidates have been struggling with to make the debate stage. I just think it's unfair. I read somewhere that not only would he be self-funding, but also he would not take a salary. And then I saw on Twitter, David he said, no, please take a salary because you're working for us.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. The president works for the American people.
Yeah.
So if you're not going to take a salary, this should not, this sends all the wrong messages. Again, it's completely undemocratic.
Yeah.
And so, of course, he doesn't need the money, but that's not what this is about.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the symbolic element of that is very, very important. There's this, I guess you could say, a nightmare scenario for a lot of people on the left, and I certainly have some sympathy for it, that out of this primary process will emerge a fiery progressive, and we have two to choose from, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, basically at this point, and they will galvanize the base, and then in the general election, Donald Trump will go on to eke out a narrow victory because that's more than the American public, or at least in some of those swing states, are able to handle, stomach, what have you. And so it comes to that question of matchups. And I guess, do you worry about that nightmare scenario? And do you think there is something to be said about maybe someone more moderate, more centrist? Not because we don't need transformative change, but because what we need more than anything else, I would argue, from the left, is to make sure that Donald Trump is a one-term president. Or is that a false dichotomy?
Yeah, I would say it's a false dichotomy. And the reason why I say that is because we really need a candidate who is going to offer us an alternative vision as opposed to sort of a milquetoast alternative that is, how can I say, middle of the road. I think we need something that's truly aspirational. And I'm not saying that I actually would necessarily support Warren or Sanders, but what I am saying is that somebody who has a clear, aspirational vision makes people want to vote for them. I mean, I have met some people who are Warren supporters that are really, really gung ho. And it's really interesting. They're super passionate. But when you talk to Biden supporters, and I know many of them too, they're all like, yeah, he's not perfect. He's a little old and, this, that, and the other. But I really think he's the one who's going to win it. And I just think, what?
Yeah.
No, that's not it. That's not going to win the race. If you're making excuses for your candidate, that's not the one.
Well, I think too that's how Donald Trump became president, right? Because he had the passionate intensity of his followers. He was really for something. Now I'm totally against it, but you couldn't help but notice that energy certainly. And I think there is a lot to be said for that. That you can't just be against somebody. You actually have to have a pretty good reason, a pretty good case to make for yourself to the American public.
Yes, exactly. I agree with that. And so I don't know how this is going to shake out because it's possible that we will have a brokered convention and we have 4 viable candidates, in July. And I really hope not, but it's totally possible because at this point, I'm not quite sure how anyone is going to really overtake another. Although I do think that with impeachment hearings in the Senate in the new year, that might really damage the prospects for senators running for president.
Yeah. So how would you, how do you, I know you're concerned and you focus a lot on change, right? And how we can change and improve our system. You've talked to a lot of people about this in your podcast. And so I'm wondering, how do you view the most likely candidates in terms of their ability to be a real agent of positive change, especially, and I think it's important to keep in mind that no matter who wins, there's almost certainly not going to be a filibuster-proof majority for either party in the Senate, which is going to make getting big changes through a very challenging undertaking.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be challenging. I don't think that it's going to be easy to continue to have a divided House and Senate. And I don't see how we will have a lot of transformative change in the government there. Having said that, I think a lot of the changes that affect our everyday lives happen at the state level. So if you are, for example, for abortion rights, it's probably not going to happen at the federal level, but you can make sure that your state no longer punishes women for abortions or punishes doctors, and so there is a lot of work that is still possible, even if it may not be on the federal level.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because we tend to focus so much on the federal level, but oftentimes people have a much greater ability to be agents of change the closer they get to home. And I think that's something that a lot of folks are insufficiently aware of, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so another example that I'd like to point out right now, because the election, Beto O'Rourke, even though he's dropped out of the national race, he is helping races in Texas, state races, so they can turn as many seats as possible in the Texas state legislature so they can end voter ID laws, gerrymandering, and things like that. And those things really matter. They matter to your everyday and to the way that your vote is counted. I think what could be better than that?
Yeah, and I think that's my sense of things is that's where Republicans have sort of gotten a jump on Democrats, or at least in the last decade they did. And they pushed forth a lot of efforts at the state level to make some changes that benefited them and made it more difficult for a lot of folks who would probably vote Democrat to vote. And now we're sort of seeing a bit of a reversal in that. I know Eric Holder is a big proponent of that, has been pushing for that, and it has the support of President Obama and others and so forth. And so I'm hopeful that the Democratic Party as an institution is focusing more on those sort of efforts to kind of make it more of a level playing field, I guess.
Yeah, I am hopeful about that too. So we'll see.
Yeah. So, I mean, aside from that, working on the local level or the state level, what else do you think that citizens should be doing or can be doing, listeners can do to be more engaged and to really try to be agents of the sort of change that they feel is beneficial, whether they're conservatives or liberals?
So I would say the first thing to do is to be well informed. And that sounds almost lazy to say, right? But
Yeah.
what I really mean is that we really need to seek truth and speak truth, right? So we cannot, as citizens, read the headlines of something and then, let's say, pass it on social media without reading the article, or to accept something as a fact when it was actually written in an opinion piece. I think we need to be really, really careful about how we gain our news, how we think about it, and I strongly encourage everyone to think on their own 2 feet as opposed to letting somebody else do the thinking for them. Like I really think we should not be listening to other people, how we think, what we think, how to vote, what to vote. I think we really need to take the time and do this for ourselves. And I think we would have a very different kind of society if we were to do that. And granted, that will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of effort. So, for example, during the impeachment hearings, do watch a little bit of C-SPAN because that's raw, unfiltered, uncommented, and watch it for yourself and form your own opinion. Don't read the recap from whichever news outlet. That will always have a bias, because that's normal. I mean, even with outlets that are meant to be neutral,
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody is truly neutral.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. And, I think a lot of times we focus, and understandably so, on our rights as citizens, but maybe we don't think enough about our responsibilities. And democracy requires for a lot of us, if it's to work as we would hope.
Yes, I totally agree. So I think the other thing that I would recommend is that we need to check in rather than check out. We need to stop being cynical, or we can remain cynical as long as we jump in and participate, in addition to, being good truth seekers and truth speakers. I think we should, and I've heard this several times from other people that I've interviewed on my show, is that we should adopt a cause. If there's something that we're passionate about, every time you read something about an issue in the news, get involved in that issue, something that really speaks to you. Every little thing that you can do, it makes a difference.
I really like that. Adopt the cause. That's great. So I get the sense that in the end, well, I mean, this has been a dark period for liberals. There's no question about it. But I get the sense, though, that you're at least somewhat hopeful. Is that right?
Yes, I am totally hopeful. I mean, some days are darker than others, and there definitely have been times of despair. But I believe in human beings. I believe that humanity will prevail. I I deeply believe in the integrity of the American people. I think that we all want to do the right thing for the right reasons, and I think we really love this place, the United States, and I think we really want the best for it. And I think if we approach it from that standpoint, there is a lot to be hopeful for.
Absolutely. Well, on that hopeful note, we will close. Mila Atmos, it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So, Trey, what'd you think?
Well, you enjoyed yourself immensely, Mike. Am I wrong?
No, yeah, I did have a good time talking with her. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and I have to say that Mila, she's obviously an articulate human being. I really liked. I've never actually listened to her show, in full disclosure, so I looked it up and listened to a little bit more about her. But I can tell that you've been a fan for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there was a few things, though, that I think maybe the two of you, I don't know, you might have been a little bit in your left-wing bubble, just slightly.
That's why you're here, Trey. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just curious. I'm curious what you think about this, because one of the things that I noticed, especially early on in the interview, was that Mila a number of times pointed out how really the impeachment process is going to be really, in her words, quote, damaging to the Republican Party, end quote, because at the end of the day, there's just all this overwhelming evidence to convict the president. But then you guys went on to talk about how one of the things that that Mila thinks that listeners should do is to actually call their representative. And I really found a lot of tension here because on the one hand, the suggestion is, look, there's this impartial thing that needs to be done. We've got to both impeach, and I think where Mila disagrees with you is convict. But at the same time, she's arguing that those who disagree with her should turn in. Well, all these Republicans, they're not going to convict in large part because their districts don't want them to. Like, that seemed like there was a disconnect there to me a little bit, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I think her view would be that if people put aside their partisan blinders and followed the hearings and got the information firsthand, that more of them would see that the totality of the evidence would bring them to approve of impeaching and removing President Trump, and that's not a partisan judgment, but just a judgment on a balance of the evidence. And I think there's something to that, but I recognize that I'm saying that from my own, in my own partisan bubble, certainly. But there does seem to be a lot of evidence. And, as you know, there's not quite enough for me. And I got to say, Trey, that I talked to Ken earlier on the day that you recorded, and he brought me a lot closer to the edge, actually. He started really getting old law school professor on me, and he brought me to the point where I'd almost vote to convict. But yeah, so, in terms of it being bad for the Republican Party, I agree and I disagree with her. I agree in the sense that I think when we look back on what I hope is this bizarre aberration of Donald Trump in 10, 15, 20 years, we'll say, my God, what the hell was that? And what were some people thinking? But I think short term, no, I don't think it's going to hurt the Republican Party at all because there's a very strong, committed base for Donald Trump. And if you take a look at the approval, disapproval numbers, they haven't budged. So in that sense, I disagree. I do think that the judgment of history will be that this was a deeply corrupt guy who finagled his way into office. And my God, that was not a good thing for the country.
Now, and I hear that and I understand that because as listeners know, I'm not, I'm giving the conservative point of view, but I'm not a Trump supporter on that front, which, as Ken and I sometimes point out, makes me a man without a country. Yeah. Uh-huh. But the other part that was interesting to me is you guys were talking a lot about, well, who needs to be up against Trump? And she kept going on about how we need this very transformative figure because that's what everybody's going to want. And I just couldn't help wondering, well, isn't this the same exact language that we heard before? I mean, if the country really wanted some transformational progressive, they could have had it. And instead, they voted for Donald Trump. And it seems to me a little bit just to put blinders on, to keep thinking. And this is where I guess where I had my biggest disagreement with you guys is you both seem to be putting a lot of faith that the American people, if they just get nudged right, are all going to agree with you.
Well, I'd like to think that enough to make up 270 electoral votes are going to agree, But no, I mean, I think the demographics work in the favor of my party. I think that seems to me to be just not a matter of opinion, but a matter of fact. And I do think that at least on a lot of these issues that the American people agree. But, and there is a tension
I agree with
here.
you, though, Mike, that I think the Democrats have the win on the front of like demographic votes, for example. But I'm talking about what I think that Mia means when she talks about this transformative change. I mean, you guys went into detail about how, well, Bloomberg isn't the transformative change agent, and I don't, disagree with you. But the fact that he is popular, the fact that that you have who's popular, who it is, I think indicates the kind of the transformative left that's being suggested here is the one that's not going to be successful. So I don't disagree that Democrats don't have a win. I just don't think it's the Democrats that I heard being pushed when you guys were chatting.
I hear what you're saying, and I think what would attract a strong majority of the American people would be somebody who is rhetorically like Barack Obama, and also politically, because of course, he's a bit too centrist for a lot of the progressive left, and that's sort of where my sweet spot is as well. So the problem, though, it seems to me, is that the choices that are being offered are just not all that great, because it's one thing to be radical, to be truly transformative like Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren. And here I would agree with you that I don't think that enough of the American public is okay with that. And I think, if Sanders or Warren's the nominee, my bet is that Donald Trump ends up with a second term after a small electoral college majority. But then when you look at the non-transformative candidates who are anywhere in the polls, that leaves us with two other people, right? Joe Biden, who has all kinds of other problems and is about as anti-transformative as it gets, and then there's the other option is Pete Buttigieg, who I like for a lot of reasons, but a 37-year-old, almost entirely untested technocrat mayor from South Bend. That doesn't seem quite to fit the bill either, which is why I've been so disappointed by the fact that Cory Booker's going nowhere, because it seemed to me he was the man for the moment, and yet it just didn't happen.
No, I agree. And, we talked when we did the show a few weeks ago about kind of my preference for Booker and all the hate mail I got over that.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I think one of the reasons, Mike, that I often find a lot of agreement with you is that you're a Democrat who doesn't fall all the way into kind of the Sanders land. But when you guys were chatting in the episode, I didn't feel like I heard the normal Mike.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point, because the normal Mike is the Mike who talks to you or Jay or Kristen or Will. I mean, I definitely am a much more, I guess you could say, I wouldn't say combative necessarily, but certainly I will push people on things. And you're right. When I do interviews, it's more sort of letting the person talk, which is why I'm so glad we're doing what we're doing now, because I don't want to be the sort of interviewer who comes on and just grills somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like in the past, even when there were really great interviews, if it was me and another liberal person, there just wasn't enough of a counterpoint to really make the interview the sort of thing that we try to do as a kind of mission statement for the politics guys, which is why, you're so important pushing back here, because I do agree with you on, on a number of these points. And certainly I'm not nearly as much of a progressive as Mila is. I call myself a Burkean Democrat, right? So a transformative change by its very nature leaves me suspicious, because I don't have that much faith in the ability of technocrats to make a bigger, better world for us.
And see, right there, that's, I think that's where we find a lot of commonality. And in all honesty, I think that is what the Mila analysts of the world are missing a little bit, because I think that she makes some good points, especially talking about trying to bring home the local action. But when she's making some of her predictions about what's going to happen at the national level, I'm going to empirically disagree. Just like the idea that we're going to have a brokered convention, or the one that she didn't see coming because the lag between the coming out, the number of articles of impeachment. On a lot of things, Trey, I want her to be right. I hope she's right on a lot of things. But my view of human nature is more, it's almost, maybe it's because I was raised Catholic, I don't know, but I see human beings as fallen, sinful creatures in a lot of ways. And so I'm skeptical of big plans to change things. And that's not to say that I don't think there are major problems in this country with inequality, with a lot of issues, really. But I guess my preferred way of going at them is
incrementally just because of my theory of human nature. And I think a lot of my friends who are further to the left have a more optimistic, a more positive view of human nature. And almost in a way, this is going to sound weird, Trey, but it's something I think that they share with your libertarian colleagues.
I'm so happy that we're ending on this, because that is actually the last point that I was going to have. And that's effectively that what I think makes me a weird libertarian is that I agree with you that I don't think the average person will always do the best overall thing, but rather just at the aggregate level, they'll end up doing the best thing we can hope for. And I agree with you. And that's where I think at the end, maybe both of us disagree a little bit with Mila, is that I don't think that if she had her way when it came to people's involvement, that the outcomes that she holds dearest to her heart would win. Not because there wouldn't be some that might not agree with her, but because I don't think, even inside of her own party, that she represents the majority.
Yeah. And I think certainly if you asked her what her ultimate goals were for public policy and government, I would be almost in lockstep agreement with her on those goals. It's just a matter of what I think is the most efficacious way of reaching those goals. And that's why I'm a center left Democrat and not a progressive Democrat. But I'm so glad that we have progressives out there, because they're the folks who challenge me and make sure that I'm not kind of going too far, just basically giving up into you could call it cynicism, I would call it skepticism. And so, I value them incredibly. And so I think it's great that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are out there talking about issues of social justice that I feel so strongly. And that adds to the conversation in an important way. I just have a different view of how we are going to get there.
Well, I say in kind of a close here, Mike, is that I think actually that is what, more than anything, I wish that my libertarian friends could slowly but surely learn from Democrats. I think on the whole, they've been the party that's been very successful at moving towards their goals little pieces at a time. And I think oftentimes those of us on the right, we blow at that. And I think that's why we sometimes lose, because we want the cake instead of being willing to settle for one piece of it at a time. And so I have a lot of respect for both you and Democrats on that front. It's something I wish I could bring to my own side.
Oh, well, thanks so much. And thanks also, Trey, for taking the time to join me to give that, to give a kind of a conservative view to this. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed being here, Mike.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. We hope you liked what you heard. Listener support is what keeps the show going, and we truly appreciate it. When you become a monthly sustaining supporter of the show on Patreon, you don't just get our gratitude, you get a supporters exclusive bonus episode each and every week. Also, supporters at various levels can get additional bonuses like Politics Guys gear and access to a special supporters-only Facebook group. To learn more about all this stuff, go to patreon.com/politicsguys, or you can visit our website, politicsguys.com/support. Subscribing to the show also really helps, as does sharing episodes. Word of mouth is, of course, the best advertising, and we really would appreciate it if you tell folks about the show. Leaving reviews and ratings on whatever podcast app you use is also greatly appreciated. If you want to get in touch with us, you can do that at mail@politicsguys.com. There's also our Facebook page where you can message us, and we're posting things throughout the week. It's facebook.com/politicsguys page. Finally, we're on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Benji Fishman, and Andra Masker. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you'll join us.